recently with someone identifying as a hawk.
A hawk?
Yeah. Bird of prey.
Mm.
I mean, if you're going to do it, it's kind of cool, right? But,
But like a real hawk. Like she or he thinks he's a real hawk.
Yeah. Well, the real hawks were up in arms about it. They were furious. But
now what would that be like that would be HERFs, right? So they'd be hawk exclusionary radical feminists or something. Wait,
radical hawks.
No, I'm getting that backwards.
It could be avian appropriation.
Well, yes, that's interesting. Happy Monday, everybody. And welcome to the Solid Ground live stream for Monday, April 17th. And I almost typed 2024 into the description, which I don't know. Maybe I'm just a little bit sleep deprived, but I didn't get us that far into the future. I've done that before where I put us in the future, but this time it reined us back. We're here today. So David, would you want to start us off with the blurb about Solid Ground?
Certainly. Excuse me, certainly. Solid Ground is a peer support community for anyone concerned about the imposition of critical social justice, CSJ, aka woke, and or COVID mandates in their workplace, university, children's school, or community. We offer weekly online peer support groups in which members share ideas, thoughts, and support for how to navigate the impact of these ideologies and answer the question, where do we go from here? You can join one of our groups for only $5 per month. To find out how to join our community, please visit solidgroundsupport.com. And please note, Solid Ground does not provide psychotherapy or legal advice, and nothing we do should be construed as such. I managed to make it all the way through that without coughing too much.
It was very good. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
We've got some hellos in the chat. Hello to Mark Cavendish, to Friar Pestle, and to CNY Photo Video. Hello, guys. Nice to see y'all here. And so Deborah had some really interesting thoughts, and we were chatting about this before, and I guess we all have a lot of thoughts about this, but we were having a discussion about transhumanism and about how people are becoming more and more reliant on tech. And just, that's just a really big, wide-ranging topic. So Deborah, do you want to kind of jump in and set us up?
I'm thinking about in terms of sort of ties to what else are we talking about here generally, but how does this fit in with whether postmodernism or social justice, or like what's happening with people's psychology as we have more of these technologies that are maybe a bit disembodying, and then that might lead to people not being sure what their gender is, or wanting to adopt a bunch of creative things that don't have anything to do with their body. This could also go off into the domain of feminism and the sexual revolution and surrogacy. I mean, there's so many different ways, but I wanted to kind of make it still be, we're not just going off on some random topic that has nothing to do with why people come to listen to your channel. So it could go in a lot of different directions. So that's how it came to mind. I'd seen some articles just on surrogacy recently, and was just thinking the more and more women don't even have their bodies do what they generally have done for however many hundreds of thousands of years or million, whatever. What does that do in terms of our sense of humanity and also politically, right? Like, what are the political ramifications? So it could go in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it really does. Sorry, David, go ahead.
Sorry, Liz. I was just going to say, on the surrogacy point, was it just that, was it talking more about the mothers that wanted children but didn't want to go through the birth process? Is it rather than... That's
an example of it. There's a lot of people doing it for different reasons. But yeah, it was like they said Paris Hilton in that one article I sent over. She's like, people being afraid of, you see girls afraid of puberty and maybe transitioning, or you see women going, childbirth. I mean, you can die in childbirth. It's not a negligible thing, right? But then there's like, well, that's a hassle. Or you're a star. I don't want to lose my body shape, my form.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like not wanting to, kind of having this sense of control over where you are. I mean, that's kind of like a delayed aging. That's like a fear of mortality that would at its core, isn't it? To be that afraid of something that would alter the body as a natural process. It's like a youth preservation. But one of the ways that I think this comes up a lot in daily life, just in conversation with friends, in conversation with clients, is over reliance on tech, over reliance on screens, a sense of addiction to social media or just to the phone. And I feel like this happens in my own life. I feel like I use my phone more than I want to use it. And we were talking about this because I was telling y'all that I didn't have any cell data for about a week. And I realized how much I rely on putting on a podcast or something to listen to while I do things like wash the dishes or, fold laundry, and how boring it was to be just left with my own thoughts during those times, and how excruciating that was for me. And I realized I really need to become more comfortable with boredom again, because I'm becoming too dependent on this. And what happens to us when we don't have quiet times for our minds to wander?
I was having this exact conversation with a landlord in a pub I was in a few days ago, and they said that they'd had no Wi-Fi in their pub to give to the customers. And she said, and particularly the younger customers that come in and say, "What's your Wi-Fi code, please?" or "What's your password?" And to be able to say to those kids, "We don't have one." She said she actually kind of did an impression. It was like a despairing look on their face of like, "Oh my God." And, she said, I found myself looking at the parents, if they were with parents, if it was a family, and thinking, doesn't say much for your conversational skills if the child cannot be away from their phone. And it's just that, and it's like you said, Leslie, the intolerance of boredom. We've gotten to that point. I'm the same. I do the same thing. I think, well, if I'm washing up or I'm cutting the grass, I'll put something on, and I don't spend enough time with my thoughts, with my body, with my sense of self. And you wonder if it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, because the more detached we can become from our bodies, the less we're able to tolerate some things in them that change or that become anxious, or things might progress, or we have a normal range of emotional felt senses that we become unplugged from, and we somehow can't tolerate them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You're reminding me, I guess I did manage it when I was younger. I mean, we grew up on a road where it was like 3 miles length road with maybe 4 or 5 houses on the whole road. And there were no other kids except for me and my sister. And there was obviously no internet or anything like that. And I remember summers sometimes the big thrill, this is so embarrassing. We'd go out in the road, and sometimes the tar, if it got hot, it would make little bubbles, and we would take a stick and we'd poke the bubbles. And like, we were like, oh, we got a good patch. And that was like we tried a lemonade stand, but no one came by because we lived in the middle of nowhere, And I think I would just lie out with books on the grass. I don't even know. I mean, we didn't have other kids to really play with, and we didn't even like playing the same things. So somehow, I guess I don't know. I read, but like there was, that was the entertainment and TV, I guess.
I love that. It's just an analog childhood.
Yes.
And I try to provide that for my kids. I have 4 kids. 2 are young, 2 are grown. I raised my girls, who are now in their 20s, without television. They didn't play video games. They didn't do those kind of things. And they were fine. They had a good time. It's not like they weren't allowed to be exposed to that, because when they'd go to friends' houses, they'd get to do that and play. And we had other ways. Like, we did have a computer, so we could stream a movie from time to time for entertainment. It just wasn't a regular part of their everyday life, and they did other things. And I have 2 little boys who are 9 and 11, and we do no screens, just about none. There's this one YouTube channel called Wide World of Trains that they love. And like every couple of weeks, I let them watch this guy who watches trains, and they enjoy the heck out of that. But I'm kind of monitoring that because of the ads that pop up and the other things that the YouTube might offer them to watch. I don't necessarily want them to go down those channels. I don't know what it could be. And they don't have a tablet. They don't play video games. We don't have a television, and we don't watch movies. It's just, they entertain themselves. And kids are, like you said, Deborah, you're out there popping bubbles. in the road. Like, kids come up with ways to entertain themselves. They really do. And I had that kind of childhood also, because I'm older and, child of the 80s and 90s. And we didn't have these things, these digital entertainment options, but I still am susceptible to tech addiction. And so I don't have some illusion that raising my kids without this stuff is going to give them some armor that protects them from it, but at least they're not in it now. I don't know if there's is there a bigger propensity when you lay these pathways young? It's an addictive process. It's a variable interval reward system that you get when you're interfacing with these things. You've got your notification pops up whenever somebody, responds to something you say, or you get a like, or you get an email or whatever, or even a phone call, even in text. It's a variable interval. And that's the form of conditioning that's most immune to extinction. And it's one of the strongest.
Yeah, intermittent reinforcement is the most rewarding and reinforcing for the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Jennifer?
I'm really grateful that I'm a child of the 70s and had all of my childhood, I did have TV, but we only had a few channels. There's no cable. So I didn't rely on the TV. And I spent most of my time outside, running around in the woods and in streams. And I spent a lot of time, like Deborah said, lying in the grass reading. And I just lived in the world of imagination. And it was really wonderful. I had to entertain myself, and I climbed trees, and I wrote poetry, and I journaled. I just really kind of enjoyed my own thoughts, and I enjoyed playing with other kids outside. It was really wonderful, and I'm really glad I had that. And I went camping a couple of years ago with my friend, and we weren't sitting there on cell phones and screens. And I realized that I very quickly felt like I was operating out of a different part of my brain, and that I had this sense of well-being that I don't normally have, even on a very calm day where I don't have a lot of duties. I think I'm in some different mindset because of my constant use of technology. And I don't think it's good for me. And it's like this thing where you don't even know you're doing it. You just pick up your phone because you have a few seconds or whatever between things, and then you're just on it again, scrolling. It's not good. And I want to start using technology more to be more conscious about what decisions I'm making with it. So I'm not just filling in space with it all the time.
Yeah, I knew someone who called it the scroll hole, like you fall into the scroll hole. And I liked that. That was a good description. You suggested something I thought was really interesting and a really great bit of advice, Jennifer. And that was to sort of set aside a Sabbath, a tech-free Sabbath.
Oh, that was Deborah that suggested that.
Oh, was that Deborah? Okay. Well,
yeah.
Sorry to
not
give
that
you
I've been
credit
doing
there,
it,
Deborah.
but my friends who are observant Jewish people do that. And it's just, I always admire them.
I really like that. I like the idea of an intentional avoidance of the tech, because you can become so reflexive, as you say.
And I think it's easier to do, like in their community, they would have a whole bunch of other people that might even be going to services at the synagogue, or families who are also observing. So you could be hanging out with people. It's not just you by yourself with no way to connect to the world. So I think having a culture around you of people also, you could do it, right? But it makes it easier when everyone else is doing it and enjoying each other, playing games, whatever, right? Like board games or something, and versus trying to do it yourself, even though it could be done on your own, but it helps when everybody else around you isn't doing it.
Just thinking back to what you were saying as well, Leslie, like about the fact that, is it more harmful in a way to allow kids at a younger age to get sort of a bit too heavily involved in technology and to start making those inroads in their minds earlier on while their brain's developing. I was also just thinking, like, as you guys were talking about all the things that you were doing growing up, that it could also just be about the fact that those kids are not practicing tolerating boredom or looking at some bubbles and knowing what it is to make something, I don't know, like happen, or climb a tree, or to sort of see what happens if I walk into the park, or do this, or whatever kids do, because they have such fascinating imaginations, don't they? And it's what they should really be using, and yet that isn't what's being done. I remember seeing like a little kid, I think it was on a TikTok in an airport, sat on the floor, and she must have only been like a 1-year-old toddler, sat on an actual magazine, and was trying to zoom out on the magazine paper.
Oh.
thinking it was a screen, and so that toddler had just picked up the screen. That's what. Yeah. Anyway, you get what I'm saying.
Yeah,
terrifying.
I think, and I try to be non-judgmental also, because you never know what somebody's situation is. If you see a family who's out to dinner and their kid's on a tablet, is it because there was something really specific happening in their lives that day and they just really need to have that conversation? They must have the child occupied, or is the child having a, whatever it is, you don't know what the circumstance is. So it's really easy to look at that and be dismissive and say, what terrible parenting this is, that would be, I guess but my first thought is, it is not healthy to pacify the kid and remove them from the social setting that they're in. That's teaching them not to be a part of what's happening. It teaches them to be set aside and to be basically working on some internal entertainment while everybody else is doing. When are you going to invite them in? Is that going to change? Does that happen at 4? When are they appropriately invited in? 6, 10?
Yeah.
I mean, because once you set up the expectation that they're going to sit there on their own digital entertainment while parents are eating, there's never going to be a conversation that they're going to be having at a restaurant that's more stimulating than the bunches of zips and zaps they're getting from that tablet. And so are they going to be somebody who can't sit through a date without their phone? I mean, what are you setting them up for in life if you're starting them out with that right now?
Yeah. Certainly, like the short term fun of it will always be, it will be preferable to use your phone or your tablet, but the long-term nourishment you get from sort of ongoing building of relationships, is being sort of jeopardized. I was just thinking, like, does that mean in a way what we should be doing with kids, a bit like alcohol and drugs and things? It's just like feeding it into them a bit later on in life, or like hopefully teaching them how to use it more sensibly, more healthily. Yeah, like I don't know if that's what you've planned already, Leslie.
Well, I guess I think that, I mean, if you look at what's the net benefit from using this, what is the benefit and what's the argument for letting kids use this? The argument is like, oh, they need to be able to use this because this is what's used in professional life, and they're going to have to work with this because this is the way the world is now. They have to understand how to use computers and how to use phones and stuff in order to operate in society. That's really the argument. But when you look at user interface on these devices, it's so simple that a person who's never been exposed to it can learn it pretty quickly. So to me, that argument falls apart. You don't really need training for 16 years on this stuff in order to be competent with it. Besides, everything's changing so rapidly anyway, so it's going to be different later anyway.
Yeah.
And what's the benefit in the short term and long term for that individual? And all we are doing, if we're not using it for a direct and important communication, we're mostly entertaining ourselves. And so what is the benefit to that child of just being entertained? I mean, in the immediate, there might be instances where something important needs to happen and the child is going to be an overwhelming distraction to something important. And so you give them something to do. I mean, that can happen, and there's an argument for that. But in general, teaching a kid to entertain themselves through expanding their curiosity and their imagination, like give them a piece of paper and some crayons at the table instead of a tablet. Like Jennifer was saying, using your imagination. And I don't know if I answered your question there, David. That was what.
No,
those
it's
are my thoughts
interesting
on it.
hearing your perspective. Yeah.
Mhm.
I don't have kids, so it's interesting hearing your perspective.
Well, it seems like using your senses more in anything integrative, like, anything you might do aside from just scrolling, right, with your hands is just so good for kids' development. I just think it's a distraction problem too. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I'm having a hard time even reading books now. Like, I'm so used to Twitter, and I might maybe I can read an article, but I barely read any full books. And when I did, I had to I'd read for a bit and I'd go, oh, maybe I'll look at Twitter now, right? Like, this is really embarrassing. And I think my thinking is less deep, generally speaking. It just feels like these little shallow, boop, boop, little thought. And like, is it sinking in? Is it, do I remember any of it? So I think, especially those early years when the wiring's getting laid down for the kids, like, to not get them in these bad neural habits, like, it's a good idea.
Like training people to develop attention deficit disorder, because the shallow attention, because things are so rapidly moving. When we're using technology, we can go from article to article, from Twitter to Instagram to Facebook, and back and forth. And I have the same trouble now, Deborah, with paying attention to something steadily for long periods of time. I can get myself to do it, but I'm sort of very consciously forcing myself to do it. God, as we're having this conversation, I realize I need to change my habits. And I feel like this kind of makes people, it's like your phone is almost an extension of yourself. And I think that makes it easier for people then to accept ideas like, well, I don't really mind having a chip implanted in me that has all my health information, that, it's great in case there's an emergency. They can just, if I'm found unconscious, they can just scan my little chip, but it also has, maybe social credit information on it, or other things. I feel like it just eases the path. It's greasing the works for moving towards something like that.
Yeah. Are the tools like external to us, or the tools part of us, or are the tools going to start being in charge of us?
Yeah, well, because there's people in different workplaces where they, I can't remember where they were doing this, but they had this little chip that allowed them, if they had to pass through a bunch of locked doors, they could just wave their wrist. And yes, that's very convenient. And then they could get in the doors. And I think they could use it too in the cafeteria, sort of like an internalized credit card. And you could make the argument, well, what's the difference if the chip is in the card or it's just in you? Isn't it more convenient to be in you? That way you'll never lose it. Right? Like, we love convenience. And now we expect to be able to, if we have a question in our head, oh, what does this mean? Or where is this country in relation to other countries? We expect to be able to pull that up within a split second on our phones. Well, what if we could just pull it up internally? I mean, it's creating people we now have outrageous expectations. And I think we're getting more and more impatient because the answers are supposed to come like that.
I never followed so much the Neuralink, what Elon's Neuralink. I know there's some things that are kind of amazing for people who may have had, some brain damage, or maybe they can't move a limb, but somehow this thing works. That like those applications do seem quite, I always go, how far am I okay with certain tech, and how much should we be helping, hearing things or helping people, and then where does it start coming? We're making designer babies and all that, and it's I don't know, it's like, where's that middle zone? Because it would be interesting if people were unable to, say, walk or speak or something, or see, and then somehow something's working that they can, but when it gets beyond that, like controlling everything, then I'm like, oh no.
Right. And I think it's important that the conversations keep pace with the technology, but it hasn't, because, when the internet first came, it was like the Wild West, and still is in many ways, like, look at all the problems, with Pornhub and child porn being available on there, and then trying to catch up with what to do about that. It's like the tech happens before the conversations and the ethical considerations really are fully aired out.
I think that's a really good point. I think that's one of the most dangerous things that's happening with technology right now, honestly, is pornography. And that's a whole nother topic. But what we've seen massive changes in how people interact with each other. And I think a lot of that has to do with pornography use. But again, I feel like that would get us on a giant tangent, which I'm happy to do at some point if you guys want. But Deborah, your point about books, I feel that too. And what you said, Jennifer, resonates with me around that. I can make myself focus, but it takes a lot more work. And I'll sit and read, and then I'll want to look something up because something will, and I used to have the dictionary nearby if I would read, because if there was a word I'd want to have, I'm really big on etymology. So I'd always want to understand if I'd come across something that interested me, I'd want to follow up. Now I sit with my phone near me, and it's so easy to pick that up and then go down a phone rabbit hole. And before you know it, you've sat down with your book, but now you're scrolling on your phone again. And that I hate that. I used to read a ton, and I really don't read as much.
Oh dear, we're all becoming idiots.
Yep. One of my concerns, I mean, could be its own bigger topic, but we could touch on it, like with Chat GPT, right? Like I wasn't having hives. I was having more alarm about it than like my brother-in-law, who can use it for his business and he can make a lot more money. And I was like, on a local, like for one individual, using it might actually be a boon. But I was concerned, there's the obvious, well, not the obvious, but there's people losing jobs or whatever. But there's also the bigger one about the catastrophic risks. Like we don't know how this could affect the whole system. But one of the ones that bothered me, I don't hear people talking about so much, is people outsourcing all of their thinking and their creativity and other things to something outside them, and almost worrying that people would be unskilled, like de-skill themselves or something. And maybe that wouldn't happen. Maybe people would figure out another thing to do with their minds, and they still would write, and they still would research, but I get worried that we'd start losing capacities that we have. Let it write a poem, right? Or whatever, do it like my sister uses it for art mashup type stuff, right? Yeah. And maybe people would still do art, but I just have this worry about us getting lazy, maybe because I would, and not know how to do things.
I think we are losing capacities.
Yeah, we don't know how to go and like build anything. I'm like totally useless for most things.
Look, one of the things when I had no cell data for a week, I didn't have my navigation app on my phone, and I felt like, how do I get around? This is so frustrating. I can't tolerate this. This is so difficult now to go to the computer and look up a map and sit down and write down directions, and then have to like refer to my scrawled out writing the whole time. And I used to do that all the time. That was like how I got around. And even that was a step forward from where we were before we had the internet to search a map up on. I've lost that capacity, or reduced that capacity anyway in myself. And that's just one example.
Do you think that people are going to start buying music created by Chat GPT, or buying artwork for their house? Or I mean, like businesses, are they going to start decorating they'll just get some AI to make some artwork for them, and that'll be, go on, Deborah.
I'll give you an example. So my sister has this, I should advertise it near now. She has Love the Breed and I Love Dachshunds. She's got this whole Facebook, community, tens of thousands of people. And she used to either draw herself or do custom artwork, and then also make products, like, I don't know, make something on a t-shirt or make a little necklace. And now she can just sit, and in 1 second she can say, she was trying to do one for Passover, it didn't quite come out, like dachshunds and in a Passover scene, or whatever, right? Dachshunds in Van Gogh style or whatever. And people like the things she's making. They're like, can I get that on a shirt? So then all of a sudden, can I get that in a frame in my house? So suddenly she'd sell a bunch of products of this funny thing she makes for people who are fanatics about a particular thing. So I don't know if I don't think your major collector is going to buy something from ChatGPT over Van Gogh, right? But I don't know, your average person might go, that's cute. I'd like a t-shirt, or, oh, I could stick that on my teenager's college dorm, whatever.
Yeah, and then we're not, you just think about all of that capacity that we're no longer using. We're not using the capacity for our memories to kind of bring back an idea of, like, something we heard down the pub several weeks ago, a fact or something like that, because we've got that on our phones. We're not really engaging with a long novel in which a character goes on a journey. We're not spending enough time doing those things. And we're not going into sort of like those creative modes in which we're just being a bit sort of free associative and like seeing what comes out. And who knows all the consequences that could come from not using our brains in those ways anymore. It's kind of scary to think about.
Yeah, my sister and brother-in-law will argue, well, no, we get to be creative of thinking the thing we tell Chat GPT to do. So I think that maybe the skill there is lost, is, say, someone who literally did hand drawing, or they used to have a designer who used graphic design, right? So they don't need that, hire that person. So they're still coming up with ideas of stuff to mix together. So they'd argue they were doing, but I think that real manual, like that skill we have for making, seems to go by the wayside.
Yeah, and the experience of that process, like that whole idea of, let Chat GPT write a poem, like the process of writing a poem is so amazing, because your mind starts to split off in different directions. And as you write, you realize that a poem has sprung up inside a poem, and that you really have maybe two poems. And just that feeling of bringing forth this creative spirit within yourself, and then gradually shaping it into something and editing it, it just involves so many different skills and so much thinking. And for me, there's so much pleasure in that, and frustration as well. But then that's teaching you something about overcoming frustration. And it's such a deeply personal process. Yeah, the idea of sort of, delegating that out to technology just seems like sort of like a death of something within the self to me.
Do you know what, Jen? As you were talking, I was going to say, as you were talking, Jen, I was imagining, like, will we ever get to a point in which we are, thinking, oh, I'm going to purchase that music from that, AI generated artist, whatever. And I kind of thought, well, would people ever get to the point where they'd say, I'd prefer a poem written by an AI, because the AI has every poem ever made by humankind in it. So maybe it understands human beings more than we do, more than one person does. And then that freaked me out just thinking about that, because if someone starts to make that argument, then maybe people will go, actually, maybe this poem is even deeper than if one person did it. It's actually a kind of amalgamation of historical poems forevermore in the past.
Right. Yeah. So this artificially produced thing becomes preferable, and we're sort of making ourselves superfluous.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the scary part. I'm listening to the series. I mentioned him before. I think Ian McGilchrist, who's a neuroscience, he does a lot of this left, right brain stuff. I've told David to watch these things. And he just had an episode on imagination, and part of it, he sort of talked about imagination as this, and it seems like a thing only a human could do. It's sort of like letting the sacred move through you, like being open enough that something else bigger than you can, and like, I don't think a machine can ever do that. Like, I think there's something special about what we are. And so you could endlessly mix up stuff that's already existed, but I don't know if you could bring in something new, like a technology could bring in something new. I don't know, but I don't think so.
Well, something I notice is that with as many people as there are that are excited about this stuff, there's a lot of concern also. There's a lot of conversations like what we're having here, where we're kind of lamenting what is lost and what could potentially be lost as we continue down the path that we're on. And I wonder what's a way to counter that? What's a movement that can counter that? Like even my my good friends that are also homeschoolers, unschoolers, and have a pretty analog childhood for their kids. Most of them still allow their kids to do some video games and have tablets and do screens and things like that. And so that's outside. So I was just scanning the chat. Somebody was talking about, let me read that one real quick. The Shade Tree Intellectual. I've had to threaten to sue my school district because they issue laptops to students for 6 hours a day to kids with ADHD who are now punished because they can't stay on task. How cruel is that? And yeah, I mean, that's like the kids who are going to school, they're getting sent home with tablets and laptops. I mean, they're just, they're being trained to be on this thing. And they're being allowed to bring phones to school and to use their phone as part of, pull out your phone and search this or do this. And so this is being, even in kids who are set aside from that experience. And I would argue like the cohort of people that I know that are homeschooling, unschooling their kids, these kids are probably getting very minimal tech compared to school kids, but they still are getting tech. And I wonder what is a sensible, how do we incorporate this sensibly, and how do those of us who are concerned about overuse bring about some change, not only for ourselves, but also contribute to a larger movement of people who are wanting to slow this down and carve out analog spaces in our lives and preserve what we still have in our non-tech identity, I guess.
I was just thinking, I mean, Deborah, you can probably speak to this more, but Ian McGilchrist talks about how the language of Mandarin has many more words in it that imply an embodied sense within the words. Like he says that even learning Mandarin, he started to see that there was a kind of a implicit instruction within the words that had an embodiment sense within it. And I was just thinking about that and thinking that we're getting to a point in our culture where we're maybe coming out of kind of Enlightenment values, thinking about mind-body duality and we've gotten to a point where we're starting to appreciate the body more as this technology is kind of taking over. and I just think is it like having a language for that feeling you get when, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but like that feeling I get when I've been on my phone too much, or, sometimes Blue and Apple tells me you've been on your phone this much this week on an average. And I just think it's crazy. So I'm just ashamed of myself, but also that I don't know, have we got a language for sort of how kind of almost congested, like I can feel quite mentally congested and tired from spending too much time on my phone or thinking about the things that I'm negating. And maybe we need to have more of a language about what it is to feel like we're giving ourselves a healthy amount of headspace from those things.
It's interesting. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Deborah.
Well, I'm just thinking about, it's not cognitive dissonance. It's just, I'm thinking about there's the sector of people who would be really up on, like, let's use a lot of technology. I'm thinking like when I used to live in the Bay Area, and that also there is a simultaneous there. Let's do yoga and let's meditate and let's make apps to meditate and so it's like, I don't know if they can see where, I don't know. I don't know if they can actually figure it out because they are bringing the embodiment piece and they're doing the technology stuff at the same time, or they're working at cross odds, but like there's a whole, I'm just thinking about a whole people who are had a big influence on the culture. I mean, even the notion of trauma and dealing with trauma and being embodied, like that seems to be filtering through the culture quite a bit in some ways, maybe in ways that we think aren't so helpful. To counteract the ways that it's helpful. Like, I don't know if there's kind of this inevitability problem though, or people say it's an inevitability. Like there's some sense of like, we can't stop the tech because if we don't do it, other people. And so even if we wanted to do more, sometimes people think, well, we can't stop it. I don't know what's really true about that, but it does seem like there's people that are making some stand for being in your body and all of this. And yet I don't know if it's going, it's so funny to say fast because the whole point of that would be slow, right? Or going slow enough. I think, I mean, one of the challenges, and Ian McGilchrist was talking about the other day, we focus so much on efficiency, and it's like there's other ways to show, what was the word? It's not like causes of things, whatever. And it's like, I don't know if we can, that's when it gets caught in like, is capitalism the problem, right? Like, I don't know where, if we stop this speed and having to compete and get it faster and get from A to B in the most efficient way, as opposed to maybe you walk this interesting way and you meet your husband on the way that you wouldn't have, you know, right? Like you lose serendipity. So I don't know. I don't know if there's enough, I hate to say influencers, but people in the culture. I mean, you have some of the people like Mary Harrington, or you have, what is it, Paul Kingsnorth, he called it the machine. And you have people talking about starting, you know, trad lifestyle. I don't know if that's more like LARPing, but like it feels like there's some pockets of it, but it's, or Charles Eisenstein even, there's people in the green world that kind of want to slow stuff down. I don't know if they have enough influence, but it feels like there's pockets of it, just like you said, the homeschooler people.
It's funny because there's like a paradox there, isn't there? Because in order to be able to be an influencer of that, you have to engage with the very thing that you're trying to convince people to stop engaging with as much. And so by definition, the people who are probably most concerned about it are least visible.
Yeah, my article about stop engaging with your phones just got loads and loads of likes. Well, hey.
So does that mean local? Does that mean this maybe needs to be more locally done? You know, I mean, I'm in a massive city. I don't know how you entirely do things locally here, but where it's like, you know, there's a regular meeting at the rec center, you know, and you don't necessarily have to have an app, you know, Twitter to know about it. And people are gathering and trying some of these things, but they don't have to have somebody that's got 1 million followers to know what they should be, you know, to know about it. I don't know.
It did feel like our culture was heading toward, you know, it feels like for a while, well, until recently, people would, you think about sort of consumerism, and people would talk a lot more about experience, wouldn't they? They talk about the experience, not just of having a Starbucks product, but it's about the smell you have when you come into a Starbucks coffee shop, and the, you know, someone knowing your name, the experience of that. And I know we're kind of shifting into a sort of a corporate point of view on things, but there is still a feeling in which our culture started to recognize that it was the experiential stuff that was much more nourishing for us rather than just consumer products. But I don't know, maybe that's left us a little bit. Internet's taken over.
Jennifer, what does Elliot think?
See, let's ask him. What do you
Elliot
think?
knows.
He thinks that he should kiss me.
No.
Well, that's about as like local as I can imagine.
Yeah, I think, man, the way to kind of slow this is in our own lives to begin with. I mean, that's certainly the starting place. I don't know where from there, but yeah, as I'm listening to this, I'm like, wow, I've kind of allowed myself to be separated from myself in a sense. And I'm really grateful to technology because, you know, I get to talk with people that I wouldn't otherwise talk with, and I get to talk with you guys, and I meet all wonderful people. So I think it's a useful, wonderful tool, but I want to keep it just a tool and not have it be sort of the center of my life and spreading its tentacles into the hours of my day in the intrusive way that it is now. And yeah, I think I need to spend more time reading and writing things. And I used to do this art journaling thing with collage, which I noticed I've stopped doing, probably because it requires effort, and instead of just hitting a button and being entertained by something.
Yeah, what you said there, Jennifer, I think about like the drive to create being sometimes born from boredom and from you know, we're restless, and if you are constantly quenching your restlessness with stimulation, then you lose the creative drive. I mean, or at least you dampen it. And I'm the same way. I don't do nearly as much creative work when I'm obsessing over, you know, scrolling.
How involved, because I'm not, which is like, how involved are each of you in your local communities? I mean, I've kind of lived, especially through the pandemic, here by myself, like through the internet, like thank God, I was like, thank God I can connect with people, but it's been harder for me to figure out how to do that so much here on the ground. Are you all like involved? I mean, David, you got your school situation.
Yeah, so I guess the university is just sort of half an hour walk away. My placement's about half an hour walk away in the other direction. Do you mean like involved in the? I mean, I play for a local football team, so I do that sort of thing. Yeah, I'd say I get out and about, but maybe not quite as much as I'd like to. But I stopped using much in the way of social media a while ago, to be honest, and I didn't do it. I don't know. Yeah, was I very conscious about it? I just started to realize how I was getting too hooked on putting stuff out there and wondering what was going to happen to it. And I just thought, I don't want to exist in that headspace, concerned about how people are going to judge me on things. I just sort of took myself out of it. So I feel quite lucky that I don't use it for that. But then YouTube is a social media platform, and I am addicted to YouTube. So I very much have to acknowledge that.
What about you, Jennifer?
Yeah, I'm totally not part of my community at all. No, I'm not. I don't even know how I would be. I mean, I do go to church, but I go very seldom for a variety of reasons. So that's one way that I think I would be involved. And I have in the past been very active in different churches, and I kept leaving as they went woke. So yeah, no, I'm not. I mean, I have people in my community that I hang out with that I love, but I don't have, anything where I'm part of a team or no.
Well, over COVID, and I have to apologize, there's a guy with a lawnmower making a lot of noise. So if that's coming through, that's on my end. Well, there were a bunch of us locally who were really concerned with the COVID restrictions and what they meant for our lives. And one of the, I guess, the silver lining was that we developed really good local community connections. So there were a bunch of us who were doing big get-togethers, trying to come out and support businesses that were not going along with the lockdown requirements. And we would get together and come out in mass to spend our money at these businesses that were supporting our freedom. And we connected really well with other homeschooling families around this time as well. So it's been over the past 3 years or so, we have really, I feel like I've gotten a lot more connected with my local community. Gosh, this guy's loud. Is that too loud? Can you guys hear me?
I hear him.
Okay. So we have a homeschool group that we started meeting with. It was 5 or 6 moms who started it in early 2020, and we meet weekly. And among those 5 or 6 moms, there's like 14 kids. And, we expanded. So we're always welcoming new people. So we've grown to be like, there's something like 50 moms in the group, but it just varies who shows up each week. And that overlaps with other groups that meet other days. And so we'll have a lot of cross-pollination where, some of us will go to theirs and some of them will come to ours. And so throughout the week, our kids have lots of social opportunities. And some of the moms formed a sports league. And so the kids play sports together and they rotate which sports. So it'll be like soccer, then baseball, then basketball. And it's a huge league. I'm trying to think how many kids that would be. It's probably something in the ballpark of 60 to 100 kids that typically play in those leagues. And it's really great. And beyond that, we do picnics and markets, and it's a really, really thriving local community that feels good to be connected to. And so, yeah, I think that's been a huge benefit in my life, it being connected on the local level. And I think like one of my, one thing I think we can all benefit from is to make our reality the size that it actually is, like connect back to our local roots as much as we can, because when you disperse yourself online, you're really not there. And there's like you said, Jen, there's benefits in the technology. Like we wouldn't be able to connect with one another in this way if we didn't have this. And there's keeping up with family and friends that live somewhere far away. It does have real benefits, but I like how you put it where you want to use it as a tool and not have it be something that is using you. Like, is the technology using me or am I using it?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. And I know we didn't even touch on like topics of surrogacy and all those other transhumanist concepts. I think that's so interesting. We just kind of stayed on phones and internet, but there's a lot to talk about there. Does anybody have any kind of final thoughts on this?
No, I just would like to say that I enjoy how our conversations go, because we'll sort of have a loose idea of what we're going to talk about. And it's kind of like throwing a stone in a pond, and then it just kind of ripples outwards and turns into these different things. And we just kind of follow where the energy is. So it's really interesting. It's a very organic process.
I'll just say, I noticed, like, especially Leslie, when you just started to describe this, community you have, like, it feels so nourishing to my body. I'm kind of like, I don't know, it's hard here in New York because not many people think how I do. It's like hard to find like-minded people, but I thought, oh God, that just feels so nourishing to imagine this, again, like, it feels like almost these different webs, and however the group of you did what you did, where it sounds just like it's really flourishing, and new things sprout out in the sports leagues. It sounds very generative. Maybe that's what I'd say. And I don't know, you didn't mention if there was much strife or anything. I'm not hearing that. I mean, maybe there's things people disagree about a little bit, but it sounds like that's not primary, which is like so rare. And so I just appreciate having that experience in my body right now, even if I don't have that particular setup right now in my own life.
Yeah, I mean, there's drama between individuals from time to time, and that happens, but overall it's felt like it's a really good thing. Although I think that it was more, there was this pressure that came during the lockdown in Washington State. It was pretty crazy, I guess where in New York, I think it was very similar, if not even worse, but Washington State was really strict. And there were a lot of people who were really disturbed by this. And so there was this pressure, I think, on those of us who didn't agree with it, that the concern brought us together. And as things have opened back up, it's the closeness has dissipated a little bit. People are more, expanding back into the world at large, and there's less of that pressure forcing us together. So, but the connections remain, and especially through the homeschool community, that's been such a blessing. I hope you're able to find something like that locally. And I love, for one thing, I really love is like seeing solid ground people connect with each other locally. That's super cool. And
yeah, I also want to check. I know Megan Down has the Unspeakeasy, which I haven't joined yet, but that's for heterodox women. And I'm guessing there's got to be a couple people in New York. So I need to join that so I can see about those folks are here as well.
mm-hmm. Yeah, it takes a lot of effort to make yourself do that kind of thing, but it tends to be, if it works out, it's really rewarding. What about you, David? Any final thoughts?
I've not got much to add, but I've really enjoyed the conversation, and it gives me food for thought. I think you're a model of plugging into your local community, Leslie, and I'm thinking I'd like to do more of that. And the weather's getting hot again in the UK, so it may well be a bit more possible now.
Well, it's cool that you play football in a league. That's neat.
Yeah, that's something. I think it's interesting, isn't it? I feel like my community, a lot of the local community, like the community work that I feel like I do is the solid ground stuff, is talking to you guys and feeling like we've got a purpose there, and doing that across continents the way that we do. I think I owe a lot to the technology to allow me to do that from a little place like Colchester in Essex in the UK. But it doesn't stop me thinking it'd be lovely to be more in person with some people sometimes, to feel like you can be part of the energy in the room a bit more.
Balance.
Sorry?
Balance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Well, thank you guys so much for this great conversation, and I hope everybody has a good week. I hope your groups are fun and lively, and really look forward to speaking with y'all next week.